lay a foundation. I've already mentioned this to you, but for whoever's watching, I also live with mental health challenges, specifically anxiety. And so I'm really honored to discuss this today.
Hmm.
I have found that these types of conversations have a way of shedding layers off of us of shame and guilt and untruths. And so every time I have the opportunity, I'm always really excited to see how I'm going to feel after and what's going to get
Hmm.
put out there. So thank you for doing
Hmm.
this.
Yeah.
One quick question just to set us up. Do you have any preference around calling it mental illness or mental health challenges? Does it kind of
Um,
work interchangeably for
yeah, I think
you?
they work interchangeably for me. Yeah, for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story, whatever you feel comfortable with sharing?
Hmm. Yeah. So in terms of processing the term mental illness, I think my story is one of a continuing journey through mental illness. And I wish I could say that my struggles with mental health are all in the past and they're all resolved. But that's not the journey God has me on. And in the past, I would say I tried to ignore my mental health problems, or was even encouraged to ignore them and just pour myself into life and ministry, hoping it'll take care of itself. But I still struggle to accept my condition and not be frustrated by my limitations. But I would say I'm getting better because I'm receiving grace from God and from others. And because I receive that grace, I can extend it to myself. I tend to be hardest on myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and I think as a teenager, I started to think that there was something quite wrong with me. Um, I was always struggling to keep up in schoolwork. I had a hard time processing all the school material and found learning hard with poor results. So I put in so much energy and get really bad marks, whereas other people, like I had friends that would show up to school drunk and they would ace exams and they were so good, and the
What?
teachers would just yell at them because I'm like, you're wasting so much talent. Um, but I was also slow to mature physically and socially. And so I was always the shortest and smallest kid in my class. And so I kind of always felt small and wimpy and kind of unnoticed.
Mm.
So I often got manhandled by bigger guys. They would just throw me around. Like one day they just started throwing me off the box horse onto the big gym mat because it was like WWF wrestling. And I was
Right.
small enough for them to hoist over their heads and kind of tumble
Oh,
over. And so it was just, and I had one guy who just kind of decided to do a chokehold on me one day in the hallway. Nobody else was around, and I thought he was a friend of mine from elementary school, but in high school, apparently, I didn't know where I stood with him, and so I
mm.
was, quite frightened because had struggled breathing after a while. Um, so I never felt like I measured up to the coolness of the inner crowd, and I often didn't even know what to say. Um, so in high school, this social gap between me and my peers just started to widen. And however, I never thought of myself as living with a mental illness at that time,
Mm.
but because it was never talked about. And the crazy thing is, like, nobody intervened. So when I went back to my school, say high school later on, when the teacher saw me, she couldn't believe it was me. And she said, I was so worried for you. I didn't know what to
Wow.
do, but I didn't realize they knew something wasn't right there.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that's kind of like a brief, introduction to how, like, I started becoming aware of something was wrong.
What was that moment
So,
like there for you? Sorry to interrupt, but where
yeah.
your teacher recognized that, did you feel angry or relieved or
Yeah, I
what
was
was it?
relieved actually because it was after university. I graduated from university. I was actually raising financial support to be with Power to Change, and I was doing a road trip.
Mm.
And so I went back to this small town in Alberta where I went to school for grade 10 and 11. And she was the hardest teacher. She would yell, she would throw chalk. She was like, I realized she was the only one that could keep these peers of mine in line
Right.
because they were quite, strong in their opinions. And, you know, yeah, it was just interesting to hear her say
Mm.
that, like, she was worried for me and that she could see I was struggling. But it was kind of sad too that nobody could intervene and kind of stand up for me or say, we know you're going through a hard time. And so that was hard to accept. But I think the biggest thing for me was, the problem with me is I internalized it. So when I saw my peers, like, not noticing me, or sometimes even I would overhear them saying things about me, that were hurtful, um, I internalized it and started to hate myself because it was my fault that I didn't know what to say to belong to this group of
Mm.
people. And so it's more internalized, and I started hating myself and thinking of myself as a loser. And I would never fit into this group. So, yeah.
That's hard. Thank you for sharing that.
Hmm.
So when did this awareness grow? I think you were starting to go into that, of your
Yeah.
mental health and challenges there.
Yeah. It wasn't until working with Power to Change that I could afford access to a
Right.
counselor. And so during my second year on staff, it was 1999, I started meeting a counselor for treatment of basically depression and just, I just couldn't function like at the capacity where I felt like I was
Mm.
thriving. I was just kind of like just getting through and always wanting to quit, And I mean, it was a big move from Saskatoon to Vancouver too, and
Yeah.
partly just the weather being so dark in the winter here. It was a real challenge. So my experience was, first of all, just addressing depression, just
Okay.
feeling blah, feeling unenthusiastic chronically, and extreme fatigue. Um, but it wasn't until 2014 when I was admitted to be an outpatient at Vancouver General Hospital, and they were discerning whether it was for depression or anxiety. And they looked at a lot of my symptoms and they said, I think we're going to admit you for generalized anxiety. And
Hmm.
so I started attending. It was a weird moment because I was walking up to VGH, like outpatient psychology, center,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking all my peers are in Ontario for staff conference starting right now, and here
Oh,
I
no
am in a group
way.
therapy session because I can't even function at the base level.
Mm.
And so it was extremely humbling. And I was kind of like, I don't want people to see me walking here even. I was
Right.
just I had my own issues with views of mental health as well that God needed to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, for many years I've been struggling also with chronic fatigue. And so I'm on a 2-year waiting list right now to be admitted to BC Complex Chronic Disease Program.
Hmm.
And so it's obviously extended now because of COVID. I have one friend that got into it, and it's a totally different paradigm now because they're all doing it by phone call.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's a long wait. And then this is the one that's more difficult for me to share. But last year in 2019, I suffered a panic attack, a pretty major one,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a result of kind of being caught in the middle of a major conflict between two different parties. And yeah, suddenly I just started feeling dizzy at the top of the stairway because I was about to have a call with basically a higher up power that I had to call into the situation.
Right. Yeah.
And I was just confused and conflicted. And these are all people I loved. And so I was just in the middle of this conflict. And yeah, I basically started to shake quite violently. I started to feel like I was nauseous and dizzy. And then suddenly my heart started racing and I was having a full blown attack. And the fire department had to come, police had to come. I couldn't even talk to the people on dispatch eventually because it just was so overwhelming. My body was just doing stuff I never thought it could,
Right.
just
Yeah.
shaking and screaming and just being in a lot of pain emotionally. And the EMT just said, yeah, I think that's one of the strongest manifestation she's seen of emotional trauma in her career.
Wow.
And she's seen a lot and she's been through a lot herself as
I
well.
bet.
But she was a
Yeah.
believer. So God put a believer right there with me in the
Mm.
ambulance, taking me to the hospital. And it took a long time for me to calm. I had many subsequent panic attacks. Um, I really struggled because I did not want to experience it again. Like I had onsets come on, and I was just like, it's the worst feeling I've ever. It felt like death is just coming over you,
Mm-hmm.
and the devil even. So I just had that sense of God, I need you every moment right now, and I needed a chaplain in the hospital just to talk with me. Don't leave me alone right now. And I couldn't let my wife out of my sight for the first couple of weeks. I was just in a really bad state and I couldn't go anywhere because
Mm-hmm.
I was so nervous and unstrung up in terms of energy. Um, and so, but God blessed me with a connection with the North Shore Stress and Anxiety Clinic in North Vancouver. And I was surprised how quickly I got in, but here I got in with a specialist in panic disorder. And so she had me on workbooks. She assigned me homework. I had to do strange things like this very chair I'm sitting on. It's a swivel chair.
Yeah.
And one of the symptoms, or one of the things they do, is that they make you face your fears. And so one of my worst symptoms was dizziness. And so I had to sit and spin my chair for 2 minutes at a time and just make myself as dizzy as possible.
Really?
And get myself used to it. Or strange things like breathing through a little straw, because I had struggles breathing, you know? And so, and just working out and just basic things. I felt like a baby. Had to learn everything again. And so it's been a long season of coming out of that. And I've had, you know, still have so many triggers, whether it's conflict or just especially conflict. I think that's what I've realized I'm just so afraid of, is conflict. And I mean, this has been the year of conflict in terms of my own personal life, but also in our global community. It's just so tense right now, even too. And so it's lots of triggers. And so I've had to learn how to live with those and accept those symptoms. And also, you know, learn deep breathing and just calming exercises and such as well. And then just really holding on to God. So
to say the least. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I'm honored. I was very vulnerable, and I know that in my own journey have had those moments, and it's sometimes even hard to reflect back on, because it puts you right there, right?
Yeah. It's amazing the memory that's there, and
what's attached to our bodies and our senses, and which actually, not to side tangent us, but that's why all of the grounding sensory exercises on the other side are so powerful as well. I've experienced that. So it sounds like there are these major limitations for you. How are you, and I think you said near the beginning you're still struggling to accept those, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, mine comes out in terms of like major fatigue. And so, for example, like I'm only working 5 days a week at 5 hours right now. And I've never been able to increase that. In fact, I've often been seeing if I should actually decrease it sometimes, just because, my capacity is so small. And that's the sad thing I find, is that I struggle with capacity before the panic attack. And now it's even more.
Right.
Because it just feels like it takes
after.
It just takes so much more energy just to do the little things like take a shower. But more so like work context, especially if it's like a strategic planning meeting, and you have to make decisions, and there's a lot of, good debate, but it just gets me worked up. Or things like staff conference, or, just realizing I can only take in maybe 1 or 2 sessions a day. And then that's enough for me to chew on and not get overwhelmed by. And so just kind of learning to pace myself and learning that this is a different phase of life I'm in. So, yeah.
I was actually just talking to the other interview I did. We had the same conversation. That seems to be a common thread, is accepting the limitations and then learning how to live differently. And also being okay with that, and not knowing if that's going to be forever or if it's a season. And I've gone through seasons where I worked very minimal amount of time, and I'm actually working 40 hours a week now, and sometimes I don't even know how. And but I think the acceptance piece of recognizing what is reality for me with chronic illness, with chronic mental illness. And still actually allowing myself to thrive in that. It takes some creativity, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to learn too, I think that's one thing that the Sanctuary Mental Health course helped me realize, is that you can have a diagnosis of mental illness but still flourish. And so you can, it's not like, and you can have like not a mental illness and actually be languishing, right? And so it's just that sense of always being aware of what's my optimal functioning for me, and not comparing myself, because I'm a worst person at comparing myself to how come these people can I've done it all my life, right?
Man,
it goes back to high school. Like, why can't I have marks like them with less study? why can't I fit in socially
Yeah.
with these groups? Why can't I acquire or accomplish more? All these questions, and even and that applies to ministry too. And I think that was one of the huge ones for me, was just I got a lot of significance from accomplishment and from stories I could share. And I mean, those are good things in Power to Change, but I realized how they become like an idol to me of,
Mm.
I could take a lot of confidence and look what I've done, look what God's doing through me. Even I might use those words,
Right.
but through the whole illness of, depression, anxiety, and chronic fatigue, it really made me kind of rediscover my identity is in Christ and Christ alone.
Mm.
And that when I stand before him, it's not what I've done, that's granted me worthiness. And we know that that is the gospel,
Yeah.
but it's I
In
don't
theory.
function in it. I don't function in it so often. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I'm still on that journey to be aware of that, but I think I'm much more aware of it than I used to be. So,
That's
mhm.
great. Yeah, I was going to ask you what are some of the things you're discovering about Jesus in the midst of this suffering, and
Mhm.
how is he ministering to you? So one of those pieces you talked about is rediscovering your identity and
Yeah.
recognizing that you matter just because you are, not
Yeah.
because you've done anything specific. What
Mhm.
else? Is there anything else you would want to add to that?
Yeah. I think, yeah, just teaching, like, I mean, I've just been writing this series on the Lord's Prayer for
Yeah, I read
an
some of
email
that.
series. And so there's just that sense of, I think God's just been showing me, like, even my prayers became pragmatic oftentimes, like that I would just be so full of anxiety and so many complexities in my life that I've come to him with just a list. And so I think he's teaching me to worship him and to rest in him, to just kind of slow down and pay attention to more the work that he's done in the past. And in terms of when I meditate upon the scriptures, but also to just be thankful when I see other people, God working through other people as well. Because I think I was so focused on worried about is nervous about my ministry, is praying about it way more than I pray for others. And so now I see that I'm way more quick to pray for others and to come alongside them. And I think to be aware of people who, like, for example, like, we're supporting a ministry now called Inner Hope. And it's mostly indigenous people who are, young people who are at risk. And just coming alongside a person who works in that ministry, or a friend who's in UGM, and just realizing, like, I was so close. I could have been so close if I would have, lost my job, or I'm unemployable now because of my mental health and things aren't working out. Like, that's a lot of these guys and women's stories.
Right.
And so just, I think God is, you know, I think it was more before I had the sense of God gives us power to conquer, but also realizing that God gives us the power to suffer. So Hebrews,
Wow.
I think it's Hebrews 11, where it's like this amazing, like, how would you say, a list of the big heroes of faith, right? But then it always
Yeah.
takes this weird turn and starts talking about all these people that suffered. And that's where I think I was at a staff conference once, and the speaker said, the same God who gives you the power to conquer gives you the power to endure. And so I think that's been my story more, is like like one of enduring hardship, with my mental health especially. And yeah, I think just,
Yeah.
one of the things I put here too is just he's weaning me off his gifts, just wanting his gifts and desires for things in this world, and just saying that if he alone is sufficient. And weaning me off my self-reliance, my ambition, and my achievement as well.
That
So yeah.
reminds me of a quote from one of
Yeah.
your blogs, actually. I was
Oh
reading
wow.
through some.
Yeah.
But it's from, I think, Randy Alcorn. Is that?
Yep.
It's
Yep.
just this one little piece of this longer quote, but we learn to depend on God when things are not going our way.
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, yep, that is very true.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah.
No,
That
and that's
is.
where I found, like, authors like C.S. Lewis, for example, like some of his quotes, like just the way they resound with me, because he was a man who went through a lot of hardship. Like, a lot of people don't understand just the
The loss
devastation of
and
losing his mother or being in the World War, and just, yeah, just, I think there's one quote where it says that, sometimes God has no choice but to take the things away from us that are most precious to us, so that we'll see that he's the most precious. And so it's not the funnest quote to read and to
No.
process, like, or I don't want it in my life. But I just found that it's often those quotes that are kind of making meaning out of my suffering
Right.
and saying that, God, there's actually a
Yeah.
purpose in this suffering. I can accept this.
Yeah.
Um, I can live with this, you know? So, and I can see your glory in it. So,
See your glory in it and actually thrive in it. And I want to come
mhm.
back to this a little later when we talk about then, the fruit of that. What fruit do we see? But
Mhm.
you had mentioned Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries. So I just want to touch on that for a minute.
Mhm.
Your entire Power to Change student staff of 125 people just
Yeah.
completed their 8-week online course, and now our whole organization is officially partnering with them,
Mhm.
due largely in part to the life-changing experience your team had. So I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about the Sanctuary course and your experience with it.
Yeah. Well, I think just to give a little background was like, I think over a decade ago, I was at a staff, basically a Power to Change student staff gathering. And I
Mm.
got up and I just, for the first time in my life, I said, I struggle with depression and I'm really struggling, you know? And I couldn't believe the response. Like, because I'd always thought that I had to kind of like come up with the best story of life change or something to kind of get
Yeah.
that sense of feeling like I'm worthy, I'm loved, I'm noticed, you know? But it was awkward, it was hard, but I think it was a seed planted and a couple other people shared too. And there's that sense of, struggling with mental health. I was always kind of on the margins because of that. And so like there was little seminars done in Power to Change, but it was never like I had it addressed by Power to Change. And so when they said that they're going to do this Sanctuary Mental Health course, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like I've been
Yeah. Sign me
trying,
up.
yeah, because on the surveys every year, I'm like, oh, we need more help, like in this area, at least I do. And so I'm assuming other people, I know of other people, and I'm hearing stories more and more of our fellow staff who are struggling with mental health, just like I am. And so there's that sense where I was excited about it, but I was also a little bit apprehensive because I'm like, okay, like it's one thing to go to an outpatient clinic and share with a bunch of people that I don't really know. And
Right.
I feel comfortable because there's a facilitator there, but it's different when it's like, these are my coworkers now. And this is where I felt the environment was always, I got to keep my act together spiritually and
Yeah.
emotionally. And so I was, a little bit fearful, and I had a lot of triggers come up, just as we were going into it and started the sessions. But what I found was that the content was so good. And it was a biblical content. It was a biblical basis. We started with a meditation on the Psalms. We heard from, pastors that I know, and I've heard them preach, and they were confessing their struggle with depression, like Daryl Johnson and then one of the other pastors too. And I actually wrote him an email saying,
No
thank you for
way.
sharing, because I had no idea that
Oh.
you struggle with this. And it gives license for me, who's also a spiritual worker, to, and I think that was big for me because there was so many
Mm-hmm.
people represented in the videos, but also my fellow staff who were engaging in this discussion. And so it was kind of a sense of relief to be like, wow, we're talking about this and I'm part of this conversation. And but I think that the hardest day for me was we were just kind of summarizing the last lesson, and I was sharing about some of my challenges with suicidal thoughts in the past, because the
Mm-hmm.
one lady was talking about how my husband took his life, a decade ago, and it's just such a sobering story. And then the facilitator Esther just asked, would anybody just read the psalm? And that day, the psalm, I can't remember, it's Psalm 43, verse 4. And the phrase that I was to read that day, because I volunteered, it says, these things I remember as I pour out my soul, how I went with the throng and led them in the procession to the house of God with glad shouts and a song of thanksgiving, a multitude keeping festival. And right in the middle of it, I broke because it's like God knew in that moment what I used to do. I used to lead the throngs. I used to
Right.
lead Bible studies. I led a whole movement of people who were, worshiping God, praying, trying to reach their friends. And now I'm like, I'm not, you know? And so it was a moment of just mourning. And, I think the facilitator, Esther, did a great job. She just prayed for me, and she acknowledged, like, here's why we're doing this, because there's hurt,
Yeah.
and there's, like, grieving that we need to go through as individuals, but also corporately as well. And so, yeah, I think that I was, hugely blessed by the content, and just being validated. I think, like, you're still a human being. Even if you're not producing like you used to, in the same ways. And we value you as a staff to take time out of our, work schedule too, nationally,
Yeah.
across the nation. And so that was, yeah, hugely beneficial to me.
That's an incredible gift. Yeah,
Hmm.
to really just be seen and heard
Yeah.
and valued. That's
Hmm.
beautiful. I'm so
Yeah.
glad you guys have done that, and I'm excited now that we're all able. I mean, we were already able to take the course, but I think this is just gonna let people know about it more, and the
Yeah.
more we hear stories about the impact too,
Hmm.
I think we'll be able to have more of these conversations.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's been, because it wasn't that long ago,
Hmm.
but I'm curious to know if you've seen any immediate impact on the way that you do ministry personally, or even as a, I don't know if you want to speak to the whole ministry, but maybe we'll stick with just you.
Yeah.
On your own ministry with students.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, like I said, like, I think God did plant a seed a decade ago, and it was more through my, like, I guess you could call it burnout, or just needing to pull away from campus ministry. And I floundered for a while, like, not knowing what to do. And so I tried my artistic side, but I just couldn't do it digitally. But that's when somebody said, "Hey, have you ever tried writing?" And so that's where I started writing. And I honestly just wrote about my own struggles with mental health, with just living, living a Christian life, and
Yeah.
disappointment too, and such. And so through that writing, I think it was just that sense of, it's opening a door for others, and then others started writing. And I think there's just that sense where, um, now with the sanctuary mental health, it's given us the same kind of words. So when I say to my supervisor, "I'm languishing, I think I need to pull back a little bit today," he knows what that means.
Right. That's
And I'm
awesome.
flourishing, and we're given permission to just be upfront with how we're doing.
Yeah.
And it's because I think my tendency is it's all or nothing. I got to be all full in and just burning like crazy, or
Yeah.
I can't do it anything. And so I'm
Right.
kind of finding my optimal zone, helping others. And so, yeah, just in my conversations with fellow staff, taking time to pause, say, "How are you doing? How can I pray for you?" And truly listening. And I think even yesterday, one of my fellow staff just said, "Thank you for listening to me." And hearing what I'm saying, because I can feel like you're listening to me when you're praying for me. And I think that's just the nature of my slowing down, and realizing, like, I think I need to do a better job of caring for people that I'm working with.
Right.
And it is important to get things done too, but just being careful and mindful of others, and helping them through their struggle to find that optimal zone too, and what's God calling me to do.
That's awesome. That's incredible fruit. And again, that thing of he gives us the power. Or did you say he gives us the power to suffer, to endure suffering?
Hmm.
But it's not for nothing, you
Yeah,
know? It's
exactly.
because we all go through suffering. It might not be
Hmm.
mental suffering for some, but it's this basic, pain. We all know what pain feels like. And so to be able to
Yeah.
articulate that in writing, I think is a really powerful gift.
Hmm.
Creativity is such a gift for us to be able to process these things through.
Yeah.
And just like I was going to ask you, I'll ask you this, and then I'll tell you my reflection. But what have you gotten responses from people from your writing that have said, not just like "thanks so much," but where
Hmm.
you can see and you can trace how your process and your suffering has actually like helped shed for them whatever shame or
Hmm.
guilt or things they're going through.
Yeah, like, I mean, I would say there's a handful of people that, like, I don't have direct feedback from a lot of my articles.
Right.
But I do have, even, say, for example, like, sometimes it'll surprise me, like, who it hits. And so, like, I'll even send updates to our donors and just say, "Here's some articles I wrote." And it's like, wow, this really ministered to me. And so, yeah, I think that um, it gives permission to start discussions.
Yep.
And I think just for me personally in my like interpersonal relationships, sometimes it's helped me to recognize it in others when I see that they're languishing. And even just saying like, I've noticed that, it looks like you're languishing, like you're talking a lot about like, oh, the weather or something, it's just, it's a kind of like a ongoing thing. And I'm like, have you ever kind of thought of checking into that kind of thing? And so I've had a lot of people that I've journeyed with, like whether it's, we have homestay students here, um, whether it's just my own kids, because they're going through their own journey of
Right.
mental health issues as well. And that actually one of the things I'll mention is that probably the most profound and the thing that's given me the most strength is actually a book I read, Changes That Heal, back when
I've heard of that
I
one.
basically had to remove myself from campus ministry and kind of didn't know what the future was going to hold. But I read that book and it said that oftentimes the problem is that only people only know us for what we perform. And so that's what I felt, because as soon as I stepped out of the director role and out of the campus ministry, it was kind of quiet and nobody was calling me. And I was like, this is weird. And I felt like I'm only known for that. And I had struggles with, sexual temptation. I had struggles with all these different things, but nobody knew except for a small group of men. And so what I decided to do there was like, okay, I have more time now. I need to get to the bottom of some of these things in my heart. And so I actually gathered some men in my church, because with student ministry, the students change every couple of years, and then I'm getting older.
Right.
And then like there's just, I can't identify as readily in terms of sharing my marital challenges and different things.
Right. Yeah.
And so yeah, I got these men together. And so, for the last, I guess, maybe 10, 12 years, we've been, different men now, because some men have moved on to different cities, back to the States or whatever. And, but there's still a core of us that are meeting every 2 weeks and just praying for each other and just sharing what's going on in our lives. The struggles at work, the struggles in our marriages, the struggles with purity, and just our, mental health. How are we doing, And then we just have WhatsApp always on to like, hey, how are you doing? So even before this
Right.
call today, text them all like, dudes, I have
Nice.
this interview tomorrow. Can you just pray for me,
I love
pray for the
that.
time. And so I think that's been the bigger thing, is just the authenticity, the openness with like having a few, it doesn't have to be the world, right? But I have a few trusted men who've been through thick and thin with me, and kind of been like proven battlegrounds, men who have been proven in the battleground of having my back, praying for me, being there with me when I'm in my lowest, when I'm in the middle of my panic attack,
Right.
to when we're sharing joys together too. And so, yeah, and I think it's just giving permission for other people. And I think that's what people
Yeah.
respond to when I'm open and
Absolutely.
vulnerable, they do too. And
Yeah.
I think I've experienced it even at a church level. Like, so it's interesting because with this whole COVID-19, our church leadership said, hey, I think it would be cool to have just a segment of our Sunday morning where we have a time of lament or a time of just sharing. And so actually it all started with Easter weekend. That's when kind of everything shut down. We did everything
Yeah.
online.
Right.
But they had an evening where it was just one person after another sharing sorrow in their life. And I'm like, whoa, it was so heavy. Like I couldn't even sleep because I was so like, I just felt like I was kicked in the gut. It felt like it was like crucifixion day,
Yeah.
not just Jesus somewhere 2000 years ago, but we're feeling it right now.
Yeah.
And I kind of even felt like that hungoverness even on Resurrection Sunday. I was just kind of feeling sober. But then what happened ever since then is they had a gospel segment of every Sunday morning where we would just share, have one person share their story. And, I shared one of the first ones, and a lot of people said that my openness and vulnerability gave them. And it was others that gave me the freedom too, like to see the leadership share so openly and honestly about struggles in their lives.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, just giving permission to lament and to mourn, to be sad. Yeah, so it's been a unique journey for sure, to be real and authentic.
That's awesome. Well, I just even in the conversation leading up to this interview,
Mm,
just really appreciated that word permission, I think,
Yeah.
is so important. Just thinking through, because this is me, this is part of my journey, but I always have these big ideas, and if I can't hit them, then it's that all or nothing kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so you were expressing some of your boundaries and limitations, and I thought, oh, it gave me permission to just check in with myself and go, wait,
Yeah.
is this really the best scenario for me if it's not for him? And so that's when we said, hey, let's do a Zoom call. That feels way easier, way more, even probably conducive to who I am and how I operate, and probably you too. And then you don't have to travel anywhere. And so just even those like practical caring for yourself things, like that's major. And so I really appreciate that about you, how you just kind of, I don't want to use the word ooze, that's not the right word.
Yeah.
There's a word that's not coming to mind, but you do that yourself, and then that ripple effects and allows others to do the same. And I see that in your writing as well. So thank you for sharing these things, these deep places of your heart. Thank you for processing them, so that you're able to articulate it. That's major. I know how not easy and how frightening it can be to go to those places. So I'm just thankful that the Lord's led you and healed you in some of those ways, and that still is and still will, because
Exactly.
it's a journey.
It is.
But while we're kind of wrapping up here, is there anything, any final thoughts, anything that you want people to know about mental health in general? Anything you feel like you missed?
Yeah, like I think one of the questions you had put out there too is, what's one truth you cling to, especially during dark seasons or dark days? And I would say like Tim Keller. It's interesting because like I listened to him a lot, and what happened was when I was starting to have subsequent panic attacks, if I'd start to go into one, I just start listening to one of his sermons and it would calm me. And so he's like my therapist.
You should write him and tell him that.
Yeah. But one of the most powerful sermons that I've ever heard him or other people speak is actually on Psalm 88, and it's called Haman's Cry of Darkness. And basically there's no light in the whole psalm. And he says it's only one of two psalms. I think it's Psalm 39 and Psalm 88, where basically in Hebrew it ends like, darkness is my closest friend. And then the other one is about abandonment, right? And you think about, what does that remind us of? Jesus on the cross, right? And so that's what Jesus quotes. But I think I'll just read here kind of some of my thoughts. But Keller points out how these two psalms, quoted by Jesus as he cried out in agony on the cross, he then contrasts my experience with Jesus. Jesus knew cosmic darkness. I only know temporary and partial darkness. He never abandoned me in his darkest hour, facing the cross in the garden. So why would he abandon me in my darkness now? I am assured that God can and does work in the midst of both outside and inside darkness. So he kind of talks about like there's a circumstance outside that's dark, and we see those in times of injustice and just, breakdown of whatever, like even the environment, but there's also inside darkness. And so God met this man Haman to write one of the most beautiful poetries, and here we are reading it like 2,000 years later or more, and just to realize like, God doesn't abandon me in my darkest hour, because he didn't abandon me when he was facing the cross for my sake. And so it just gives me that sense of buoyancy, to have my heart anchored in the gospel. And so I think that's kind of how I would sum it up, I guess.
That's a fantastic way to close this out. I love that. He doesn't abandon us.
It's kind of like one of those things where it's like Jesus faced the cosmic darkness too. Like it's compare and contrast. So my darkness is quite relatively small, and and it's also what do you call it? It'll have a time where it ends. Like I do go through my seasons still, but thankfully they're further in between. I'm doing better and I'm learning. But there are going to be times, and yeah, just, I mean, even the thing I struggle with too is that my mom struggles with bipolar disorder. And so she had a manic
Mm,
episode back in March. And it was like, I was just like haunted by the fact, is this what I'm going to become too?
right.
So it's generational. It's not just like, can I escape this, you know? And so, but
Yeah.
that Jesus helps me through it and not necessarily rips me out of it,
Yeah.
is the part that I'm more accepting
Mm.
and trusting God for. So,
And I think just to add one thought there, and
mhm.
this is partly because I just read your series on the afterlife too.
Oh
So
yeah, that's awesome.
diving deep.
Yeah.
That you had just said too, that's a truth that we can cling to. Is this, it will end. It's
Hmm.
not forever. And I
Yeah.
know there are times where it feels like forever, and for some people it is
Yeah.
most, if not all of their life.
Exactly.
But I think that's the thing that we have hope and faith for, right? Is
Hmm.
that it will end. And that has helped me on those days and in those seasons where I'm just like, I feel like that psalm. I just end in darkness
Yeah.
and this is it
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah. No, like you feel so permanent, right? And
Yeah.
that's another quote I remember by Tim Keller. He said that there's this an older lady who had many chronic problems, and they would say
Hmm.
to her like, "Oh, you must be in doing so like hard and stuff." She goes, "Oh, it's nothing the resurrection can't cure." And so it's just looking like the cure is coming. It's just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
deferred, right? And but
Right.
having that hope is so profound, and that's why I wrote that series on the afterlife, is because I think about it a lot,
So
um,
helpful.
because the weight of glory is so much greater than the weight of pain,
Yeah.
that we're going through right now. And so if that's what Alcorn uses, that analogy, like it
Yeah.
tips the scales. If you have eternity in the balance, and that's your hope and your glory, that's what keeps your perspective in the midst of the suffering now. So
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I
cool.
want to end with a quote from you,
Okay.
from your email that you sent me.
Oh wow.
I feel like it summarizes a lot of what we said, and I really liked it. So you
Cool.
said, I am realizing more and more that my honesty helps me to discover that others also struggle. I am not the only one. We face it together.
Yeah,
This is really powerful. So
exactly.
amen to that. Thank you so much for taking the risk and chatting with me and sharing your story. To our fake audience, or our audience who isn't here but is hopefully listening right now,
Yeah.
thank you so much. We hope that you were deeply ministered to by this, and that it helps to give you permission as well, to take care of yourself, and to see truth and know truth in this.
Hmm.
So thanks.
Man, thank you, Maria, for
Yeah.
initiating and trusting me, taking a risk with me too.
Yeah, this is true. You're welcome.